ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, is a term that keeps getting discussed in the C-suite and in the corporate boardrooms. But how does it work and what are the impacts to the business? Stay tuned. Hey everybody, this is Chris Brandt here with another Future podcast. Growing out of the UN's Corporate Social Responsibility Initiative over the last 20 years, ESG has grown to represent more than 30 trillion in managed assets. And while some have argued that the initiative has failed to truly impact the cost of capital for irresponsible firms, this has not stalled the initiatives to push companies towards social responsibility. Today, we have with us Ricky Marton, co-founder and CEO of Koru, which provides a data-driven platform for connecting companies with impact organizations for improved corporate sustainability, ESG, and social impact initiatives. So let's talk with Ricky about why this movement is so very important. Welcome, Ricky.
Hey, Chris, great to be here.
I think this is a really interesting topic because I hear it talked about all the time. You know, I hear people like, but so often the folks in companies really don't understand what it is, what the scope of it is, why it's important, or even like how to implement, how to monitor, how to make it all go, right? So could we just start with like, tell me a little bit about ESG. And I know ESG has at times been a favored and, fallen out of favor as a term for what all this is. But if you could just like kind of give me a little bit of an intro into what ESG is, that'd be great.
Yeah, certainly, Chris. And fully acknowledging the fact that it has kind of ebbed and flowed over the years. But ESG in itself, like you mentioned, it stands for environmental, social, and governance. So a lot of this corporate conversations around ESG and doing good kind of falls under the same umbrella. ESG in itself, though, it began way back in the 1960s, believe it or not, as a way for individual analysts and firms to look at how they are socially responsible with their investing.
Yeah.
And so this allowed them to exclude certain stocks or industries that had certain activities related to it, such as tobacco production or involvement in the South African apartheid regime. And what this did allowed investors to take a look at the portfolio and say, we don't want to focus solely on profits, but ESG is this lens to look through to help us have these more sound decisions. And so what that's evolved to today is this practice where corporations of all sizes are adopting these ESG principles to make sure that they are actually being more transparent about who they're working with, their supply chains, making sure their business practices or the products that they create don't have any negative ramifications. And ESG has been this way for them to disclose all this information. And so it goes in the terms of corporate social responsibility, sustainability, social impact. All these terms kind of encapsulate it, but ESG is this blanket term that really encapsulates the entire industry at large.
And I've got to think that any company that is thinking or following ESG guidelines is going to be a more mature company, probably a company that's going to be better run and, probably be a better investment just for the sake of being able to recognize the importance of it and actually implement it beyond all the other things that ESG brings, I would imagine.
Yeah, certainly. And that's kind of like the conflicting areas that you hear where oftentimes ESG is this practice. It's kind of like a catch-all be-all where it's, we plant trees to offset this or that, or we look at, carbon emissions and we track our scope 1, 2, and 3. But I think you hit the nail on the head there where typically if companies are mature enough to acknowledge this ESG movement or this pressure from these different sources, allowing them to be more transparent and think about this from a business standpoint, that's the companies that really thrive. And the issue I think that comes with this space is that there's this term greenwashing, there's pinkwashing, bluewashing, all these different terms for companies that aren't actually following through and really integrating these practices into their business. Mm-hmm. And that's when like the difficulty comes because the consumer or an employee or investor sometimes have a hard time distinguishing from the two.
Yeah.
But the ones that have really ensured that they're cracking down on workplace discrimination or ensuring that the practices that they are implementing are curbing carbon emissions versus the opposite, those are the ones that are actually going to hold out and thrive, not only in the short term, but the long term as well.
Well, and I think that, in the context of, some of the people I've talked to, one of the things I mentioned is that, some of these things that you're doing now are going to be required of you from regulatory or compliance perspective down the road. And getting a head start on getting there is going to leave your company in a better position to be prepared for when those types of things do hit. And we see all these movements, and like from all the corporate governance things that have happened in Europe and in the United States. Some things in California and different states have some of these initiatives, and quite frankly, it's caught some companies kind of flat-footed when that happens. So you can see how it can benefit some companies to be prepared.
To touch on that a little bit, I think it comes back to like systemic change, and this transformational approach is completely necessary. So these companies, large and small, whether they've experienced it or not, they are soon going to be experiencing and succumbing to these public pressures. And whether they're ready for them, whether they're running around scrambling, like they're inevitably going to come. And the stats are in for this. Like especially as millennials, Gen Z, Gen X are starting to put these, this pressure for companies to become more transparent and open-minded. The current practices and policies that these companies employ, whether it's plundering and polluting the planet or destroying the human capital assets of the organizations or, fracturing community development organizations and programs, they're not going to be able to do this for much longer. And Koru, for example, like we don't declare ourselves as an ESG or sustainability company per se, but what it stands for is this foundation of the companies actually have to start doing good. They have to start caring about who they're interacting with and what not only the byproducts of their products are, but down the line, what does this actually trickle down to? And like you said, if they're ready for it, wonderful, they're going to be able to thrive. But the companies that are actually advocates and leading in the corporate sustainability space are the ones that actually felt the heat a little bit early on, ironically enough, and they're the ones blazing blazing the path forward with this practice.
You mentioned your company's name, Coru. Could you talk a little bit about what that word means?
Yeah, certainly. So I won't go too far in this direction, but Koru in itself is a term used by the Maori people from New Zealand, and it represents this uncurling fern that shows progress, growth, and it's a simple spiral. And so that's kind of where our logo came from. And I actually had the ability to travel to New Zealand, and I did some work over there, and then they have this incredible movement where they declared their national river a citizen of their country. And what that allowed for them to do is actually have these bylaws in place that protect the river on a level that's same to their people. And so companies that were polluting it, to other organizations that were taking and planting farms instead of destroying the agriculture that was already there, they're actually to hold legal lawsuits with it. And that sentiment was just extremely beautiful for me, but also it has had tremendous results. And so Koru itself is a way for us to represent this, cool, neat, innovative movement, but at the same time, like progress, growth, development are all integral to what that word means. And we try to put that forth in our work as well.
That's really amazing because, here in America, I think the only thing we give personhood status to is corporations. Right?
But the irony is there, isn't it, Chris?
Yes, it certainly is. It certainly is. How does a company get started in this? I mean, you've got a company and you're recognizing some of the movements out there. You're seeing some of the pressure, and you're just like, I don't even know what to do here. How does a company get started in this?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris, and one that we field all the time. And I think it's recipe of looking at where you are as a business, what sort of company you are, how large you are, where you have geographic ties. All these different factors go into how you can have a successful ESG sustainability initiative. But I think the most important thing is what I tell companies on a regular basis. It's a bite-size endeavor. So a lot of large companies, Fortune 500, Fortune 100, they're regularly publishing 100, 150-page sustainability reports, really speaking about every little intricate data set that they have or are able to collect. And that can be really intimidating, especially for small and medium businesses, because they look at this and they're overwhelmed by it.
Right.
But what we try to do is encourage companies that are recognizing this. Like, first of all, great, that's step one. You need to start to acknowledge these movements that are taking place. But the secondary piece is, where are you as a business and where do you want to go in the near term? And how do you create little bite-sized pieces and goals to allow you to get there? So that could be as simple as ensuring that your facility is LEED certified, or talking to your employees about what they care about and how you can better serve them in the workplace. And by taking that one step at a time approach, it's able to allow you to accumulate these different data points and then start build out your practices internally for what's best for your business. And that last part, I think, is what's really important, the customized nature. This ESG sustainability space, there's no one size fits all. There's no template that will guide you from A to Z in a successful fashion. And I think that in itself is really intimidating for businesses. But what you have to do is acknowledge that your business is unique. How do you use your business direction and your company's assets, whatever you have working for you, to work for this? And at that point in time, if you can integrate that within the foundations of your business, that's when you'll have some really successful outcomes.
And I know this ties into like AI as well. And one of the things that we talk about in the AI front a lot is just the idea of having an ethics review board or some sort of corporate governance in place around it. Is that sort of the same initiative, or maybe even the same group of people that you need to put together to start to tackle this ESG piece?
I'd say so, and I love how you touched on it in the comparison there. My master's research, I don't even know if we covered this, was on AI and ethical emerging technologies, and the same concept goes into place. And the issue with it, AI in general, but also sustainability, is oftentimes it's seen as a short check the box. We should probably do this, but it doesn't actually drive revenues, doesn't drive change, doesn't allow us to push out products any quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're trying to do is shift the rhetoric around that whole concept where, year after year, and more so now than ever, the reports are coming in that companies that do adopt sustainable business practices truly adopt them, not just piecemeal. We're donating here, we're trying to plant a tree. But the companies that actually do have better financial returns, they're able to create innovative products. They're able to make their employees happy. So, customer attention is more focused on them versus their competitor. And so it's really important to start early and ask the right stakeholders and get the right stakeholders in the room. But at the same time, you have to recognize that if you're a medium company, the most important thing is to make profits. You need to have products that are high quality. You need to have your services that are satisfying the needs of your customers. And we'll talk about more of this later, the whole profit, purpose, and how they link together. But I think the involvement from lots of different voices to ensure that you're asking the right questions from day one to make sure that you're satisfying the right needs that are right for your business at the current day and the current juncture is really important. And pulling that synergy between AI ethics and saying that why do we need this, or we can kick this can down the road. It's no longer that time, and so I think we need to start realizing that this moment to start adopting these practices was yesterday, and the sooner that you can begin to do that, even if very very piecemeal, is going to help you out in the long run.
Yeah, well, let's talk about product, profit, and purpose. It does sound. I mean, like I think there's a lot of evidence to say that if you can, tie all those things together and be successful on all those fronts, you're going to have a very successful company. I mean, could you speak to how that all comes together?
Yeah, I agree with you there, Chris, and easier said than done. Everyone's listening to this probably like, yeah, of course, I'd love to tie them all together.
Sure.
Certainly, but where's the roadmap? And I'll say enter Koru, but silent pitch there. The concept of product, profit, and purpose is something that I really resonate in, and it's something that's really integral to our business. And there's a lot of companies out there, some of our competitors, I won't name any specific names, but they're under this pretense that you should be donating an X amount of your revenues, or you should be supporting certain community programs, you should allow your employees to give back to certain areas. And what I believe is 100%, that's fantastic. It's great. They shouldn't stop doing that. But at the end of the day, we operate in a world that business and capitalism is what driving this factor. And you need to have high quality products at the end of the day, because no matter how altruistic or philanthropic your business is, if your product isn't what's demanded by customers, your business is going to fail. And so we build on this aspect. If you think of like a triangle or a pyramid, where we have the basis of quality products and profit as a means to attain this meaningful, acknowledging purpose, that acknowledging the fact that you can only reach this pinnacle with the other two in place. And so our core philosophy, and kind of what we were joking about, is like when you have an excellent product, you achieve profitability and purpose, and you have them work in synergy. That's when you create these extremely dynamic or even really successful outcomes to actually put yourself ahead of the competitor, more or less.
What are the first steps? Like when you come into a company and they're saying like, God, we're really struggling to figure out ESG, and we want to get involved, but we just don't even know where to start and how to get it going. Like how do you engage them?
The first thing we do is it's like a very manual, hey, we'd love to work with you, support you on your goals. And so we don't want to put this, blanket technology on what you're doing and say, here, follow these steps, you'll be great and wonderful. But the first thing we do is we do a quick analytic piece on this company. And so we built out this tech that's really amazing, because it allows you to put in just your simply website, and using a few data points on our end, it actually is able to spit out an assessment that looks at what's material to your business, where you operate in, certain sustainable development goals that you should be supporting, and then some creative ideas to help push this forward. And that's intended to be kind of the roadmap, the step one, to say, hey, this is where you are as a business. This is what we'd like you to focus on. And then the next stage in that is actually putting action behind this. And so action is one of the key words that we really put a lot of emphasis on, because going back to the large, 100, 150 page sustainability reports, they're great. They have a lot of merit to them. They're able to, be used for tracking.
You have to cut down goals. A lot of trees to make those 500 page reports.
You have to cut down a lot of trees. That's certainly true. And in that case too, it's we ask the question, what does that actually generate? And there's purpose. I'll never say anything bad about them, but from our perspective, we want you to take this quick analysis, we call it our snapshot analysis, and then pair it with strategic partnerships. And so the first step is knowing where you are. The second step is, what can we do to actually change this, or what can we do to create something impactful and meaningful that is directly aligned with your business? And that last piece right there, there's crazy stats out there about 47% of partnerships in general fail, or all these different areas of why different relationships don't work. And a lot of it comes down to the shared values, missions driven, goals and things like that. Yeah. And that's what we really put a lot of emphasis on.
What kind of companies are we talking about? I mean, is this all supply chain companies? Is this like hiring for, I got to imagine you really cover the gamut. How do you match these people?
We cover companies from all industries, all sizes. We've worked with, $2 billion publicly traded companies, all the way to mom and pop, small gyms and local plastic printing companies. And our, blanket answer is we can support these in a variety of ways. And of course, the $2 billion company is going to have a lot more comprehensive, giving strategies and investment strategies than the small mom and pop shop. But our analysis is the same way. And so it's based off your industry, based off what sectors you work in, based off your geographic ties. And this could be anything from supply chains where you have physical employees, and then also some other little variables of, what products you produce, who is your end user, what do your employees care about? This all goes into our system and allows us to kind of paint this comprehensive digital profile of you as a business. And so this can range from, who you are, what you've done in the past, perhaps, what your sustainability goals should be, what your product differentiator is, and how you want to grow from there. And then we help you find the partners that actually push forward with this. And that's, I think, when the really fun comes in, because we allow you to support, local charity or some giving initiative that's directly tied with your business. But we also let you find those innovative, unique partnerships that you otherwise wouldn't have found. So a good example is we were working with this food and beverage manufacturing company, and they're really interested in having a new refrigeration technology. And so there's a couple startups working with innovative cooling tech that doesn't use any water consumption and is able to have the same output as a normal refrigerator, but it's eco-friendly, requires less energy. And by adopting those practices, partnering with them, they're able to reduce their overhead from the costs required for energy and water use, while also having kind of a green practice and being on the leading edge of a new innovative technology. And that in itself is the creme of the crop, because those partnerships are what really make their business succeed further. And going back to the innovative product, generate more profits, and then having the purpose tied into it is something that's really impactful for them, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because in that product you mentioned, I can see that being a really strong strategic differentiator for a company. So it's like you said, product, profit, purpose, right? And it's funny because, if you look back in history, right? We're in kind of this new gilded age, I think, right now. And you look back at sort of the old robber barons and things like that. They had this sort of sense of noblesse oblige, right? That's what created the Chicago lakefront, just the donation of all that land to be used for public purpose and things like that. And there was this sort of sense that, you had to, give back to the communities that are buying your products, because you have to sustain those communities, or there'd be nobody to buy your products. But it seems like that sense of noblesse oblige has completely gone out of the world, and it seems like it's got to have some, like a little kick in the pants to make people kind of go through these efforts. Is it? Is that the only way people are coming to this, I guess? And, I know there's firms out there that are analyzing these things too. Is it just because they're being guilted into it, or do you see any sense of corporate purpose ever emerging?
It's a good one, Chris, for sure. And I love that example. And I think my quick answer to that one is it depends. Oftentimes there's these, I go back to these public pressures, and this is from everything from investors to consumers to employees. And they're putting these pressures on these companies to do good, essentially, to, do better for the planet, to ensure that supply chains are more transparent and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And our answer to this is like, we don't believe that you should purely support these innovative products that maybe have sustainable impact, but you should have what we call, balanced and diversified impact portfolio. And so one lovely quote by some woman we were working with is like, the key is to move this strategic philanthropy to partnerships that can actually make a difference and drive business outcomes. And that might be supporting a local nonprofit. That might be helping some research institution get off the ground with some initial funding, but it also might be an investment or a grant in a really innovative product. And so us, and what really distinguishes us, and this is what my PhD research and really driving my thesis home is, you need to have this balance between this altruism, philanthropy, and corporate, responsibilities in terms of the giving side of things, but it all needs to be grounded in the umbrella of what's good for the business. And I think that's oftentimes why these relationships fails or the results aren't ideal is terms of what they're looking for, is because it's piecemeal, it's short term, it's check the box, and it's not actually grounded in, are we trying to rebuild this lake because we want to expand to this new market and because we realize that we're taking some space away from the local communities, or is it we are a beverage company, we want to support the local animal shelter? It just doesn't have the alignment there. And so I think having those questions asked initially are really important. And then looking at, what is strategic from not only a short-term perspective, but a long-term perspective, and how we're going to grow into that is what's really pivotal for these businesses to realize from as early as possible.
You mentioned the term greenwashing. I think people get very skeptical of ESG efforts because they see a lot of these greenwashing efforts where it doesn't really look sincere. It looks, just as a purely marketing initiative where like they'll, rather than donating, the money to the local community that would, be able to utilize it, they run an ad campaign that, is 10 times as expensive as the actual effort they're making to promote the effort they're making. And it just seems, that sort of insincerity out of it. I think there's just a general lack of faith and trust in corporations now. And I think people are very skeptical of anything they do that purports to have any good.
I completely agree. And that's something that we see all the time in our industry. We talk to investors or these clients, and they're like, we're not going to put money behind this because there's this skepticism that our customers are showing. And I think what the issue is that, for like the black and white of financial benefits, profit, are you making profits or not? Good is a very arbitrary term. Are we doing good? Are we having a positive impact? Are we having, social values intricately integrated with our services? And this is something that, research has tried to cover, but it's a very gray area. And what our system has created is a lot of these products that, maybe have not the best intentions in mind are recognizing the benefit of this green movement, of this ESG movement. And they create their own label, or they create some little icon that says we're X certified. And there's not a really strict standard, at least that's known very well to the public, to be able to look at that and say this is a legitimate one versus not. And that's something that we're, trying to work on. It's like eventually maybe there's a Koru stamp of approval that shows that all brands are like this. But the issue is that every industry, every kind of brand line has this differentiator. So it's like a food and beverage company will try to have their stamp of approval. A t-shirt company will have their stamp of approval. And the differing factors between the two make it really difficult for an everyday consumer to be able to recognize that. And I mean, even myself, I'm guilty of this. I'm in a store looking at different products and I'm the one that takes pictures and say, what does Rainforest Alliance mean? Or what does this mean? And I'm looking at like the actual reasons behind it. And some customers are just not that level of detail. And they'll either look at it and say, this is great and wonderful, I want to buy it, I'm doing good, knowing that they maybe donate a penny from every $1 million that they make and saying they're giving back. Yeah. Or they're a company that's doing really impactful things, but haven't incorporated it well within their branding and marketing. And so then they kind of fizzle out from that perspective. And so there's a few, really good companies out there that I think are tying them together. And this comes back to they have a really good product and they're able to push forward with their story and their purpose really well and integrating that together. But I still think the whole industry and our society at large needs that next step, which allows a little bit more pressure to be put on these companies that are doing this unethically, for lack of a better term, and just trying to capitalize on the marketing needs from it. And so that's something that we're working forward. And I think there's going to be a lot of insight and resources that come out about how to recognize these brands that are actually doing good versus not. There's already some, scanning apps that you can put on your phone to say, hey, what does this mean? What does this label mean? And so like these innovations are coming into the space, and it's just going to take a little bit longer for them to get adopted in full practices, I believe.
They're not monoliths either, and like around Pride month, you see all these companies putting the Pride flag on their products, but at the same time, like supporting political candidates that are diametrically opposed to those values. You see a company like Apple, for example. They've got all these great, we're going to be net zero, and we're going to be this, and we're going to be that, but there's still exploitive labor practices going on all over the world, and those are very difficult to contain. And I'm not saying they're not trying to do the right thing, but sometimes it's very difficult, and the message gets out in front of the practical application of a lot of those things. And I think that's also what gets it all very confused. And it's sort of like, and sometimes the old epic Titis, like perfect is the enemy of good kind of thing. It is true. I mean, you do sometimes have to look at it and say, like, there's a net positive here, even if they're not all the way there. We shouldn't throw away the good that these programs bring just in the quest for perfection, right?
There's a lot of discussions going on with that very topic. Just last night I was having a discussion with this really great tech company. They're in climate tech. They're working on carbon sequestration, really innovative technique here. And they are in relationships with a lot of these like oil and gas companies because they're trying to make their product line, and they're trying to find the next era of these businesses. And oil and gas, for example, is, you hear ESG, destroying the planet. They all kind of are synonymous in people's minds. But you have to remember that a lot of these professionals, they're actually trying to do the right thing. They've created this massive, massive industry and are recognizing the damage that it's caused to our earth, and they are trying to do good for it. And so that's when the difficulties come with ESG and sustainability. And I'll bring up the example, Larry Fink with BlackRock, one of the largest proponents of the ESG movement. Recently, he actually stopped using the term because it's become too politicized. And I think that's what's happened in the US specifically, is like this polarization that's occurring where ESG terminology, sustainability has become this like way to challenge against each other, when recognizing that, maybe the BPs or the Shells of the world are doing things, whereas, the electric car companies maybe are just, pushing forward a new product. And it makes it impossible to really distinguish between the two. And there's no clear-cut answer for it. You don't know if a business is doing this because they had some, oil spill and they're trying to make up for it, or if they're actually saying, we recognize we're in a position of power here, and we need to do something to create a better future. And that's the difficulty that I deal with. And that's something about, transparency and ensuring that you're being really honest. But at the end of the day, it's a difficult one to discern the two. And I think it's going to continue to go that direction. But as long as we have these pressures being put by these different individuals in different stages of their life, whether it's, their employee at the very base or someone coming into power for the first time, that's the change that's going to slowly start to push the ball over the hilltop, I believe.
You mentioned BlackRock, and I think that's a really interesting example that they're, pushing ESG. I mean, BlackRock has had a notably controversial history, right? I mean, they've had some really pressure put on them, for some of the things that they've done, and it's an interesting thing. Like I know that like last year there was even protests where they were shutting down, and I think it was in France, they were shutting down BlackRock offices all over the country, and you look at that and like it comes to the question of like, is this company, can this company turn itself around and really adopt these principles, or is it something that do these companies need to go away? Like what there's a line somewhere. I'm sure it's a very wide and gray line of like, what can happen. But that's where I think that skepticism from people comes in, because it's like, okay, well, here's a company that ostensibly is not always invested in the most ethical things, but is leading this ESG movement. Is that a good thing?
Yeah, so to touch on that a little bit, it makes me think of a couple different angles, and I'll be careful of the rabbit holes I can go down in this conversation.
Sure.
But there's companies that I believe are really doing well. They're paving the way forward. They're creating this like change in their product line. They're ensuring that they're actually hitting these goals. And I think it all comes down to the word transparency that I've used
Yeah.
multiple times before. So Koru, for example, we get asked from time to time, if one of these big let's say industry leaders such as Exxon or Mobil come to us and say, we want to work with you. Would you work with them? And sometimes they're like, you can't help them out. They're the evil. They're destroying the world.
Right.
And my philosophy is these companies have the opportunity, they have the vessel, they have the means, the platform to do good, to push forward the industry in a sustainable way. And we would welcome them to work with us.
Right.
However, what we built into our platform is the ability to really hone down and peel the layers back of the onion and allow them not to greenwash. So we tie direct quantifiable measures to all of our programs and what these organizations and companies can get involved with. And we have thresholds in place where if a company is doing this purely for the greenwashing, the marketing purposes, we can put the microscope on them and say, this is not intended for how we want to use our services. And then we will kick them off the platform to some degree. And this allows for the companies to recognize that they are in need to do good and actually like follow through with their objectives. And then we can put it to the public sphere saying like, hey, this is actually what they're doing. They're actually creating this change. They're actually incorporating these practices into their business versus just saying that they are, or, supporting some local charity just to kind of make up for some corporate bad that they perhaps did in the past. And I think that's what it comes down to is like sharing these stories and ensuring that it's coming from credible sources, because that's another conversation of, topic of conversations that, what you're reading, you're not entirely sure about. But what I believe is at the core of what these businesses really need to work on is like actually having meaningful action and sharing that in a genuine nature. And of course, much easier said than done, but I think slowly and surely we're starting to see the pressures actually cause corporations to recognize this and try to work towards that.
And I think you're so spot on with the transparency piece, because I do think, like a company that's historically not done great things, like having them, turn it around and start to do things, they have a lot that they can make an impact on, right? I mean, there's a lot of room there to really improve upon things. And I'm kind of a, I do believe in incremental change, as frustrating as it can be, as opposed to sort of radical change. But, like I was interviewing I interviewed a company called Upwing Energy, and, they're in the drilling business, quite frankly, but they developed a pump that goes in and can extract, because when you make these wells, you only extract like 20% of the resources in there. The rest of it just sits in there, and then you got to go drill another well. Well, he's like, well, I got a pump that can operate down there and actually move that extra, get it to 50, 60, 70, percent of extraction. So we don't have to go and create new wells, which may destroy environments or be problematic everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not excited about prolonging the life of the gas, the hydrocarbons industries necessarily. I'd love to see cleaner technologies, but it's not going to change. We have to accept the reality it's not going to change overnight, and incremental change is going to help us get to a point faster than just arguing about whether or not we need to get rid of it all or not. And I see this as sort of the same kind of situation.
I completely agree with that, Chris, and it's really well said. And I love that example. I was just having a conversation with this clean tech company, and they're actually working in partnership with some of these oil and gas firms because the drilling is very inefficient. They oftentimes leave a lot of untapped things. And so what their tech actually does, it's in the carbon sequestration space, and they're able to put CO2 underneath these reserves that are deep inside the earth. And they're actually able to use that storage technique to lift the remaining amount of things they're trying to extract from the earth. And so that allows you to tap into not only 20, 30, 40%, but actually lift it and create a full depletion of the resources and then cap it off in a permanent storage for the CO2.
Right.
So that goes on this question of where are we in the future? How much money is needed to get to these goals that we're putting out there? COP28 just came out, and we have these ambitious claims and the trillions upon trillions of dollars needed a year. But at the end of the day, I think incremental innovation is going to be what gets us closer. And you can't, the whole, how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. You need to look at these really little steps along the way and ensuring that you're making the right means and looking at the right players in the space that can help push ship forward. So I completely agree with everything you said, Chris.
And I think hyenas have really figured out how to eat the elephant, and it's not a pleasant story.
That's what I don't want to witness, but
Yeah,
I'll take your
they
word for
started
that
an
one.
end you wouldn't want to start at. That's apparently the softest part to start chewing on. But in the sort of the world of climate change that we're dealing with, I'm seeing an increasing number of people who are saying, we've kind of already past the point, of no return. And now we need to be in the world of mitigation strategies and things like that. And so a lot of these things can help to mitigate, some of the challenges and struggles that we're gonna be facing. So, I think that's going to be increasingly important, even if we don't get to the goals, the ambitious goals that we have, set for ourselves that are going to be very difficult to hit.
And to touch on that too, and I will by no means declare myself a climate expert, and there's some brilliant minds working in the space. It's tangentially related to our industry, certainly. Mm-hmm. And I think what you said is spot on. And what we will really put emphasis on is the collaboration piece. It's great to see these groups coming together, these different countries coming together, but I think it needs to come all the way to the grassroots level. What individuals can work on something together, push forward in maybe a university program and create some really unique solution that's novel and understood by just them, and how can we scale it and apply it to the rest of the world or to different contexts that can benefit from these. And that's pitching Koru again. That's where the partnership piece comes in. Using these shared resources, shared thinking, creating these innovative ideas that cause from breaking through the silos. That's I think what's going to move the needle, and that's what's going to really create some positive change. And that's truly what I'm excited about seeing.
Tell me what's next for Koru. I mean, where do you go from here? You've kind of you've recently rebranded the company, and I know you've put together this online service to sort of do all this, very clever matching here. And where do you go from here with all that?
This is an exciting topic for me. And currently at this juncture, we recently signed a partnership with Green Sports Alliance, an amazing membership group that allows sports teams, stadiums, different leagues to be more sustainable in their work. And so coming this next year, we're going to be working with a number of these great teams and leagues that are trying to push forward and put action behind some of the practices that they already implement. And so this is step one for us as a business, where we're putting this analytic piece to the matchmaking component. What I really want to do with Koru is create what I like to call the crystal ball of partnerships. And that allows us to take this concept of digital twins. I can go on a rabbit hole talking about this, but it's looking at what exists in real life and then creating a virtual digital copy of it, and then having scenario testing done on this virtual version. And what that's going to be able to do for us is have enough data, enough modeling put together in one place, learning from what makes for a good partnership and also bad partnership, and then be able to create a predictive technology that is able to help companies find the most innovative, most unique, and highly efficacious partnerships in the space. And so boil it all down to the fact that right now we're kind of shooting from the hip when it comes to our partnership formation. We are trying to link up with organizations, nonprofits, international government organizations, maybe research groups over here, a mission-driven startup over here. But I think what's going to really set us apart and what I'm really thrilled about is being able to use all this technology to create this piece that says, hey, these are 5 options for you. The benefits that will come from it are this, this, and this. But maybe option number 3 is really ideal because you won't have to avoid all these unintended consequences from the other one. And these are some creative solutions that you can employ with it, and pulling the innovative technologies in the space that we know are existing and only going to continue to accelerate from here on, and tapping into the potential in the partnership game to create this profit generation, this product development, and this purpose-driven synergy piece all together in one place. And so once Koru can tap into that and really exploit that aspect of how do we use predictive analytics to create the future and what it looks like and guide companies through that partnership process, that's, I think, when we have a product that's really going to set ourselves ahead and do a lot of really incredible things as far as, creating good for the world.
I've certainly had some interesting companies on this podcast that I feel like are doing really cool, good things. So if you ever need a connection there, I'm happy to make that. Thanks so much for being on. I love the work you're doing. I think this is really important stuff. And I think that the more, we have people like you out there doing this, the better the world is going to become. So thanks for doing what you do. Excited to see where you go from here, and congratulations on your success so far.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. And likewise, it's always fun to have engaging conversations with like-minded individuals. And at the end of the day, it's all about visibility. It's getting people to ask the questions and think about this maybe for the first time or put a more concerted effort to it. So I'm really glad we had the opportunity to chat. Looking forward to engaging in the future. And I appreciate all the well wishes and looking forward to hearing what you do as well. So thanks for your time.
And so where do they go to find you guys?
Yeah, so you can find our website. It's www.koru.global. So KORU.global. And you can email me at ricky@koru.global. So RICKY at the website. And happy to field all questions. We're in this very sponge-like state. So we want to hear your problems, your challenges, what you're doing as a business. Like there's no thing that I think is too small. And I enjoy really trying to tap into the core root and be creative with it. So I urge you to reach out, and I appreciate that shout out for us, Chris.
That's awesome. And I'll put some links. And thanks again for being on. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Yeah, it was a great time. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. Thanks for watching. I love to hear from you in the comments. And I know I always say that, but if you comment, I, generally try to respond, unless it's something really weird. And please, if you can, give us a like, think about subscribing, and I will see you in the next one.